Now that Dominaria United is coming to a close and the Brothers War is picking up for Draft and Sealed Deck, we're going to be doing a limited review of the Brothers War, and we'll start by going over the artifacts first this time. The reason is the Brothers War focused on the artifacts a lot. Urza and Mishra in their early days were digging up the artifacts of left behind by the Thran, and so I figured the artifacts are probably going to play a big role. So I'm making these videos by reviewing one color at a time, and the first will be Colorless, and I want to go over how we will be rating these cards. As a refresher, if you did not see my Dominaria United videos, the way that we grade is we give Fs to cards that are just unplayable in Limited. They're usually rares that are meant for Constructed that have no basis in Limited. Then the D range means filler. We will do D- for filler you'd really like to avoid, D for base level filler, D+ for filler that's on the good end. Cs are your normal playables, so solid C is like your average card that's a playable. We'll do minuses for the lower end, pluses for the higher end, and then Bs are the cards that draw you into that color. So that's kind of the breaking point between the C pluses and the B minus. C pluses are just your better normal cards. B minuses slightly pull you into that color. And then A's are bombs. So A minus, lower bombs, A pluses, big bombs. Once you get to the A level, you're don't really need to debate too much whether it's an A minus or A plus. You're going to want to play that card. So with that, we'll just kick it off right away. I guess I will mention too, we go through the colors starting with commons. So I'm only going over the common artifacts today. I'll do another one for uncommons, but we'll be going in mana value order. So it is alphabetical, but starting with ones first, then twos and threes, etc. So let's not wait any longer. Let's get into it. First up, we have Clay Revenant. It's 1 colorless mana for a 1/2 artifact creature golem. Clay Revenant enters the battlefield tapped. Pay 2 and a black, return Clay Revenant from your graveyard to your hand. So this card is a fine rate. The recursion is nice. It's a little small to be worth a card, and it really sucks that it enters the battlefield tapped because you can't just go ahead and play this and get it right into play to block. For example, to kind of chump block. But I'm going to give this a D+. I think it's on the better end of your filler. Up next, we have Combat Courier. Pay 1 for a 1/1 artifact creature construct. Pay 2 and sacrifice Combat Courier, draw a card. It has Unearth. This ability comes up a good amount. Where it is, you pay the Unearth cost. You return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step, or if it would leave the battlefield. Unearth only as a sorcery. Alright, so this card is an expensive divination in a way. If you think about it, it's pay 1 and then 2, so 3 total to sacrifice it, draw a card. But it's one that affects the board. So you really want to use this kind of to like block and then draw a card. And the Unearth lets you do that twice. So I kind of like this card. I think it's under the playables route. I don't think it's on the high end of that though, so I'm going to give it a C-. Up next, we have Goblin Firebomb. It's 1 colorless for an artifact with flash. Pay 7, tap it, sacrifice Goblin Firebomb, destroy target permanent. So I'm not looking to put this in my deck unless I have a lot of ways to make its ability cheaper, but there are ways to do that in this set. I do think this is filler. I'll just rate this a D. It's expensive for what you get. Removal is always nice, but not for 7 to 8 mana. Aeronaut's Wings. Pay 2 for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+0 and has flying. It has equip 2. Usually these equipments aren't worth a card. This is often best in your red-green beatdowns type decks where you need some kind of evasion to finish them off and you have trouble breaking through with a bunch of big creatures. So I think it's playable in those. I'll just give this a D. I think it's filler. Up next, we have Coastal Bulwark. Pay 2 colorless for a 1/3 artifact creature wall with Defender. Coastal Bulwark gets +2/+0 as long as you control an island. It has 2 tap, and then you can surveil 1, which is look at the top card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard if you want. So I'm still not a fan of Defenders, even though it was a thing in the Dominaria United. This one is a decent rate, though, and searches you for the cards that you need. With that, I'm just going to give it a D+. I think it's in the filler category. Up next, Dredging Claw, 2 colorless for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+0 and has Menace. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield from your graveyard, you may attach Dredging Claw to it, equipped for 1 and a black. So it's nice that the equip cost can be cheaper, but Menace isn't evasion-y enough for me to like this card any more than a D-, so I'm just going to give it a D-. Up next, we have Energy Refractor. For 2 colorless, it's an artifact. When Energy Refractor enters the battlefield, draw a card. Pay 2, add 1 mana of any color. Alright, so this isn't bad if you need fixing, but I will say it's expensive for it. Paying 2 up front and then having to pay 2 to get your color later is a bit expensive. It's nice that a lot of times these cards, the problem with it is you want the fixing, but you don't really want to waste a card just to get your fixing, and so this replaces itself. But it's expensive for what it does. I do think you will play it a good amount of the time that you want to, you really need fixing, but I'm going to give it a D+. Up next, we have Mine Worker. 2 colorless for a 2/1 artifact creature assembly worker. Tap it, you gain a life. If you control creatures named Power Plant Worker and Tower Worker, which we'll see later in this, you gain 3 life instead. So I guess I'll mention the all these cards, the Power Plant Worker, Tower Worker, and Mine Worker all work with each other. Each one of them has tap it to do something more if you control the other 2. I do think it's hard to, in Limited, get the other 2 and keep the other 2 on the battlefield as well, so all 3 of them are there. But I am okay with a 2/1 for 2 that, when it can attack, because, say, they have defenders, or they have creatures up that would eat your creature, at least this one can then sit back on defense and then tap to gain a life. So I kind of like that. So I debated giving this a C-, but I think it's just better as filler, so I'm giving this a D+. Up next, we have Scrapwork Mutt. For 2 colorless, you have a 2/1 artifact creature dog. When Scrapwork Mutt enters the battlefield, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. It has Unearth for 1 and a red. Now, a 2-mana 2/1 that rummages you for better cards and does that multiple times, that's decent. I think that's a straightforward playable. I give this a C. Up next, we have Supply Drop. For 3 colorless, you get a artifact with flash. When Supply Drop enters the battlefield, target creature you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Pay 4 and tap it and sacrifice it to draw a card. This is a very expensive trick. Really, for tricks, you want to keep it within the 1, maybe 2 mana, because really you want to play something to affect the board, keep up some mana so that you can trick later, rather than just hold up something that can really affect the board, or hold it up to not affect the board a turn, right? It's good that it replaces itself, which is kind of the problem with tricks a lot of the time, but at the cost of 4 mana, that's a little expensive. I'm just going to give this a D. Up next, we have Tower Worker. For 3 colorless, you get a 1/3 artifact creature assembly worker. It has reach. Tap it to add a colorless mana. If you control creatures named Mine Worker and Power Plant Worker, add 3 mana instead. So this is not a great rate. I'm optimistic, though, that this set will reward you for ramping up your colorless mana. So I'm going to start this at a D+. Like I mentioned, I think it's hard to keep it in. Tower Worker, Power Plant Worker, and Mine Worker all in play, but D+ it is. Up next, we have Veteran's Powerblade. For 3 colorless, you get an artifact equipment that has equipped creature gets +2/+0. You can equip a soldier for a white, or you can equip any creature for 2. This isn't really worth a card. It's only useful if you have a bunch of soldiers that need to break through a line of defenders to finish the game, but equipment like this typically is not worth using. I'm giving this a D-. Up next, we have Scrapwork Cohort. For 4 colorless, you get a 3/1 artifact creature soldier. When Scrapwork Cohort enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token. Unearth for 2 and a white. I wish the toughness was bigger on this guy for the cost, but it's okay. It brings in a second creature. The Unearth is a nice bonus, but it's a little bit expensive. I'm going to give this a D+. Up next, we have Scrapwork Rager. For 4 colorless, you get a 2/2 artifact creature Phyrexian Horror. When Scrapwork Ranger enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and then you lose a life. Unearth 3 and a black. So this is basically a new version of Phyrexian Rager, right? That's what this is a play on. But for 4 colorless, that's kind of expensive to get Phyrexian Rager on the battlefield. It is nice that it has Unearth and you can get another card out of it. But I don't think that's worth the extra mana, especially when you have to pay the unearth cost later on. I still kind of like this guy, but I don't like it as much as I like Phyrexian Rager. I'm going to give this a C-. Up next, we have Stone Retrieval Unit. For 4 colorless, you get a 2/3 artifact creature construct. When Stone Retrieval Unit enters the battlefield, create a tapped Power Stone token. So I'd love this much more if it gave you a Moxen, right? Something I can use to pay for any spell cost. But this will go a long way towards fueling activated abilities. And it's nice ramp, but it doesn't require your creature to tap out to use it. So I like this guy. I give us a C. I think it's just a solid playable. Up next, we have Mishra's Juggernaut. 5 colorless for a 5/3 artifact creature Juggernaut with Trample. Mishra's Juggernaut attacks each combat if able. You can unearth it for 5 and a red. So this is something worthy of unearthing, especially with it having Trample. Ultimately, it's a lot of damage for a single card, and it is true it's just a big creature though. But I like this one quite a bit. I think this is a solid playable. I'll be playing this a good amount. I think this is a C. Up next, we have Power Plant Worker. For 5 colorless, you get a 4/4 artifact creature assembly worker. You can pay 3 colorless, and it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If you control creatures named Mine Worker and Tower Worker, put 2 +2/+2 counters on Power Plant Worker instead. Activate it only once each turn. So this is an underrate card. I would expect to be like a 5/5 for 5. But the pump ability is nice, especially as a mana sink, although you can only activate it once each turn. I don't love this card. I think you can get better elsewhere. I'll play it if I need to. I think it's on the higher end of filler, but I'm giving it a D+. Up next, we have Swiftgear Drake. For 5 colorless, you get a 2/4 artifact creature Drake. It has flying and haste. When Swiftgear Drake enters the battlefield, put up to 1 target card from a graveyard onto the bottom of its library. Alright, so this is underrated as well. For 5, I'm typically expecting like a 3/5 flyer. It's nice that it has haste though, and the big ability is that you can get something out of the graveyard, such as maybe an unearthed card that your opponent has. I think it's okay. I still think it's filler. I think it's on the higher end of filler. D+ it is. Up next, we have Takaja's Amulet. For 5 colorless, you get a 4/4 artifact creature construct. When Takaja's Amulet leaves the battlefield, you gain 2 life. It has unearth for 3 and a white. Alright, so again, it's underrate, but this is a more decent version of the underrate. Because you can unearth it, and if you think about it, ultimately that is, 4 points of damage twice, so it's 8 damage. And the fact that it gains you a decent amount of life in the process, getting 4 life back, that's good. But I wish this had Trample, right? It'd be much better that way. But I think I'm just going to give this a C-. I think this is on the lower end of your playables. Up next, we have Goring Warplow. For 6 colorless, you get a 5/4 artifact creature construct. Now, it has Prototype, and I want to get into what this Prototype is. So Prototype is basically an alternate casting cost that allows it to come into play with a different power and toughness, but has the same abilities as the card. So I like this concept a lot. I, in Limited, value flexibility a lot. A card is much better when it's good both early in the game and late in the game. Even if early in the game it's a little bit weak, and late in the game it's a little bit weak. I'll sacrifice slightly on that front to have the card be good at both times. And these Prototype cards fall into that category. So 5/4 for 6 is underrate. Death Touch still underrate. But, they might try to block with a couple of creatures in order to kill this, and the Death Touch is good. And early in the game, you can get a 1/1 Death Touch for 2, which is underrated as well, but that flexibility makes this pretty good. I like this card as a C, basically based on that flexibility. Up next, we have Blitz Automaton. For 7 colorless, you get a 6/4 artifact creature construct. Its Prototype is 2 and a red, and it's a 3/2, and it has haste. So this can be a 3/2 haste for 3, which is a fine rate. Or it could be a 6/4 haste for 7, which is, a bit low of a rate. But again, that flexibility of having it good on turn 3 and on turn 7. So same as the last card, I like that flexibility. and I think this is a C. Up next, we have Boulderbranch Golem. For 7 colorless, you get a 6/5. It has prototype for 3 and a green as a 3/3. When Boulderbranch Golem enters the battlefield, you gain life equal to its power. What I like about prototype is good early in the game and good late, and I like it to be like quite early in the game, right? It still has flexibility between turn 4 and turn 7 here, but I would rather have my prototype cost 3 or less. 4 is not that far off, so this card's okay. It is a bit underrated. The gaining life is typically what you want to do in kind of a green beatdown deck where you need to survive longer and then take over the game with your big creatures. So it has that going for it. I don't like this as much as the other cards, though, just for how expensive the prototype is. I'll give this a C-. Up next, we have Depth Charge Colossus. For 9 colorless, you get a 9/9. It's an artifact creature Dreadnought. It has prototype for 4 blue. It's a 6/6. It doesn't untap during your untap step, but you can pay 3 colorless to untap it. I don't get this one as much. Again, I like my prototype being cheaper. It is true, a 6/6 for 6 is a fine rate, so at least you have that going for it. And I am optimistic that there will be enough ramp in the set that you can get a 9/9 for 9 out some of the time. And when you can, this will be really hard to deal with. That's a big, beefy creature. So I'm going to give this a synergy grade because I think you need the ramp to really want this, like Power Stone Creation. We saw some of that earlier in these artifacts. But I'm going to give this a synergy D. I think you're probably going to want other creatures for your big creatures, but who knows? This would be one I'd be willing to come up on as I see more ramp. And then lastly, for the commons, we have Rust Goliath. For 10 colorless, you get a 10/10 artifact creature construct. It has prototype 3 green. It's a 3/5 in that case. It has reach and trample. So kind of like the other one, I don't like the expensive prototype. 5 is better than 6, but 5 mana for a 3/5 reach trample is an okay rate. And I do really like that this has trample, though. If you can get this as a 10/10 reach trample out, you're doing it. So again, with the ramp idea, I like this more than the last card because I like my big creatures to have trample. So I will give this a synergy D+. Again, I'm willing to come up on this if we have enough ramp for it. And that's all for the commons. Stay tuned, I'll go over the uncommons next time, and I'll go over the rares after that, followed by the rest of the colors. Thanks everyone, bye-bye.